He was abandoned by his mother. He was rejected by his people. Once upon a time, there lived a young man named Omar. Omar was a plumber. Omar was fondly called by everyone, his parents, his siblings, his family, and friends. He was really a fine boy. Everyone liked him. With his fine face and character, he couldn't get a lady to marry. Suddenly, one day, the news spread that a lady was pregnant for Omar. At this time, Omar was diagnosed with a chronic illness. He was still able to move about though doing his business. One day, he decided to do an official introduction of the lady carrying his baby. At that time, the pregnancy was 6 months old. He brought the baby to his immediate family and friends and introduced her as the woman carrying a baby. And also, he said he would like to take his people to the girl's family in order to prepare for a proper family introduction to start their preparation to legalize their relationship. Along the line, his illness worsened, so the ambition of going to the family for proper introduction was aborted. So he was frequenting the hospital for treatment and checkups. 3 months after, his baby was delivered. He was a bouncing baby boy, a very dark one. The news came and everyone was happy for Omar, but the baby was not around there. On the 8th day, the baby was brought to Omar's father's house, where Omar had been for proper care. The baby was named and he was called Akin. A week after the naming, his mother took him with her and went back to her own people for proper care too, because she said she wasn't married. Omar's health worsened and his baby mama stayed aloof with the baby until this fateful day, right in front of Omar's father's house. Very early in the morning, when the first person that opened the door got outside into the compound, he found something that amazed him. He ran inside to inform Omar, but Omar couldn't run out to see, so he told him to call his eldest brother's wife from the next apartment. The guy ran to the next apartment to inform them of the surprise that was in front of the compound. Omar's sister-in-law ran with the guy to the frontage of the house. She was surprised to find a baby in a carton with a letter in his diaper. She brought out the baby with the letter and read through. "I have tried and I cannot continue to take care of this baby alone. He can eat solids now, so I said I should return your baby so that I can face my life. If you become well, you can look for me, but this is your child, Akin. Goodbye, Omar." The sister-in-law took the baby inside to Omar and she handed the baby over to Omar, who was very ill. She said, "Who will take care of this baby?" Omar's mother had traveled to the United States to take care of the baby born in the US by Omar's elder brother. She was informed and she said the child should be taken to a family friend in the community, Mrs. Ola. Immediately, the baby was taken to Mrs. Ola as the whole drama was explained to her. Mrs. Ola, with the consent of her husband, accepted to take care of the child till when his grandma would be back from the US. The child, Akin, was only 8 months old as at then. A month later, his grandma arrived from the US. Mrs. Ola took the baby Akin to his grandma. Then the conversation ensued. "Ah, Mrs. Ola, thank you so much for taking care of this child. God bless you." Mrs. Ola responded, "Amen. You see, Mrs. Ola, you will have to do this favor for me. Oh. How do I take care of this baby and his sick father in this house? Kindly take the baby with you, please. When the father, Omar, is okay, I will come get the baby Akin back." "No problem, ma. We will take care of him. Our prayer is that Omar recovers quickly and gets better." Mrs. Ola took baby Akin home with her. At this time, Mrs. Ola was a grandma too. She had 7 children, all grown up. 3 were married with children. She had her last 4 living with her and her husband, but all grown up. Her last born, that was 20 years old as at then, when they took baby Akin into the family. 3 months later, it was Akin's first birthday, and Mrs. Ola's husband said she should take the boy Akin to see his father since it was his first birthday. Mrs. Ola took Akin to see his father, and this conversation ensued between Mrs. Ola and Akin's grandma. "Ah, Mrs. Ola, there is no need bringing Akin here. Do you want the baby to know or feel that he is not part of your family?" "No, Grandma. Reby, it's not like that. My husband said I should always bring him once in a while to see his father, so that the boy Akin will know his father. He is part of us. He is such a loving boy. Everyone liked him. I just don't like that idea. I think you should just keep him with you. Thank you so much for taking care of him." Mrs. Ola took Akin home after he had spent time with his father on his birthday, and this they did regularly for Akin to always spend time with his sick father. Not until a fateful day, the sad news broke in the neighborhood that Omar had passed on. It was a very sad day. Akin was taken to his family house, and the father, Omar, was buried the same day in the evening. Weeks after the demise of Omar, his siblings called for a meeting, and Mrs. Ola was invited to bring Akin along. In the meeting, Omar's siblings said that the boy Akin was not Omar's child, that they were hoping that Omar would recover and then take him with Akin for a DNA test, that they weren't sure of the paternity of Akin. Mrs. Ola was shocked. "What are you saying? This is 4 years now, and you are just talking about DNA? It is so obvious. Everyone can see the resemblance on this boy's face." As it is, no one knows the whereabouts of this boy's mother. No problem. I know one day everything will be fine. But I am very sure that Akin is Omar's son. The resemblance is there. Time will explain this. The meeting ended and Mrs. Ola took Akin home with her. At this time, Akin had just started school in one of the faith-based primary schools in the community then. Akin topped his classes all through the primary school. His people didn't look back to give a support to Akin's education. Akin knew his real people because he answered their name, and he knew his father even before Omar, his father, passed on. Akin loved his foster parents and the big brothers and sisters he had, though they were far older than him. Months after, Mrs. Ola's husband died and was buried. Months after, Akin was about to write his first school leaving examination when his favorite sister, Auntie Tolu, from his foster mother, got married. That was the person that was actually paying the largest part of Akin's bills. After she got married and Akin was about going into secondary school, she visited her mother one day and they had a discussion concerning Akin. "Mommy, you have really tried to have carried Akin for 10 years. I think his people should begin to do part of his responsibilities. Akin is growing. He answers their name, not my father's name, not my husband's name. I will still be supporting anyway, but I just feel that his people be responsible for him too." Tolu, you have taught well. You know these people now, because no one wanted to take responsibility of Akin. That's why they talked about DNA test the last time. I will see his grandma and see whatever she can be given to support Akin, as things are no longer same even for me. As they know, I'm a widow. My children are still trying to really fit well. When Akin's grandfather heard about the new development, he said a shop should be given to Akin from one of the shops as Omar's share of his father's properties. But Akin's aunts and uncles would collect the rent of the very shop and not send anything to Akin or Mrs. Ola. Akin went through secondary school in one of the private secondary schools in the community where they lived. He was a very brilliant, intelligent, and jovial boy. He was through with secondary school at the age of 15 plus. He cleared his O-levels at one sitting and gained admission into the prestigious University of Ilorin in Kwara State in Nigeria. He studied criminology. After his first year, he started a footwear business as a side hustle, as he ensured that his hustling did not affect his grades in the university, and also he was able to get something to take care of himself without really bugging Mrs. Ola, his mother, much. After his 4 years course, Akin had graduated from the university with a very strong second-class upper. Mrs. Ola was so proud of him, as Akin has become a responsible young man. At this time, Akin was so proud of himself, as he had finished well and also had built his footwear business. and had made a lot of money and a good name for himself. He remembered his favorite sister, Auntie Tolu, had advised him that immediately he finished with his first degree, he should apply for scholarship abroad for his masters. And he did. After his convocation, he applied for a master's degree scholarship in the US. Akin had grown into a young man, looking so much like his father's younger brother who lived in the US all the while. The resemblance was so much that anywhere Akin went, the people that have seen his uncle here in Nigeria before would stop him and ask after his uncle who lived in the US. It was time for Akin's convocation at the university. Mrs. Ola was the happiest mother that day. She succeeded in convincing Akin's paternal aunt to please attend Akin's convocation with her. A year later, Akin got a fully funded scholarship to study for his masters in the United States of America, as he has applied to study criminology. Akin put all his savings together. Mrs. Ola supported him, and his auntie, Auntie Tolu, his favorite sister, also supported him. Akin graduated as the best master's student in the US after his master's. He had studied criminology. He got a job immediately in the US with the FBI. Mrs. Ola and her children were the only family Akin could really identify with, though he answered his father's surname. 2 years after, Akin was getting married in the US, and he invited his mother, Mrs. Ola, his favorite sister, Auntie Tolu, to the United States of America for his wedding ceremony. Mrs. Ola couldn't believe herself, as it was her first time of leaving the shores of Nigeria. It was Tolu's first time also. Mrs. Ola informed Akin's biological aunt about the ceremony, and Mrs. Ola also informed the uncle who lived in the US that Akin would be getting married in the US, and as such, he would be the father of the day. The time came. Mrs. Ola and Akin's favorite sister, Auntie Tolu, arrived in the United States as Akin was at the airport to pick them. When Akin sighted Mrs. Ola, he ran through the crowd at the airport towards Mrs. Ola and Auntie Tolu and hugged them. He was so happy to have them with him. On the wedding day, his paternal uncle that lived in the US was there as the father of the groom. It was an emotional event as Akin got on stage at the reception to thank his mother, the woman that sacrificed everything for him to get to where he was. He gave Mrs. Ola the keys to a 4-duplex estate he built in Nigeria for Mrs. Ola, which she never knew about. Mrs. Ola was swept off her feet. She never knew that the day she picked up the boy was a day in history for her. All the years she tried to get Akin's paternal people to accept him as one of them, and they rejected him, saying he wasn't Omar's blood. Not until the boy became a young man and looked exactly like a man he never lived with. Then After hearing his accomplishments, one of his uncles here in Nigeria said, "Ọmọ wa ni, ẹ̀jẹ̀ wa ni. He is our child, he is our blood." Mrs. Ola came back to Nigeria with Tolu, and Mrs. Ola informed all her children about the gifts Akin gifted her in the US. The children all came around as Mrs. Ola invited them to come follow her visit the 4-duplex estate. This was how Mrs. Ola became a landlady after living in rented apartments all her life. She moved into one of the duplexes and rented out the remaining 3. Every child indeed is a star. Every child should be given the opportunity to shine. Who knows what would have happened if Mrs. Ola had not taken Akin in? Comments are welcomed. I am sure Mrs. Ola didn't see reward when she was taking Akin home. She only saw a way to help a helpless child. She saw a way to give hope to a hopeless child. Whenever we have the opportunity to help anyone in distress, let's render help. You may not know what that your kind gesture would do. You may be saving a whole generation by helping just one soul in need or in distress. Thank you for watching. Please share with me what you learned from this story and what you love about it. Share this story also with your loved ones. Please subscribe to my channel for more interesting stories. Until I come your way again. Bye for now.